of the prologue. The classical civilization. So last time we talked about the ancient civilizations, and we centered ourselves on Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, and the Yellow River Valley. And now we're going to really expand out from those in this section. But the first thing we're going to cover, actually very briefly, or not very briefly, I should say that, but we're going to cover religion. And there are two major world religions that come out in this era. So in the previous era, the two big ones were Judaism and Hinduism, were the two major religions to come out of the ancient era. And in this era, we're going to get Buddhism and we're going to get Christianity, right? So first off, let's start with Buddhism. I just want a marker. That's fine. Thank you. So we see Buddhism formed in India, which I think a lot of people don't necessarily know because it's not usually associated with India. We'll see why in a little bit. But we see Siddhartha Gautama, who is a Kshatriya noble. He's a very wealthy man, and he's set up for life, right? And he sees a lot of suffering, he sees a lot of death, and he doesn't know why he's seeing it, and he starts to question why he's seeing those things, and that leads him to kind of go out and try to discover the meaning to suffering, and that leads him on a kind of a vision quest of sorts, and then he eventually meditates underneath a Bodhi tree, and then he goes to the deer park at Sarnath and gives kind of his first presentation of Buddhism, and he forms Buddhism. And the kind of core competency, the core thing about early Buddhism is the idea that all life is suffering. All suffering is caused by desire. To get rid of desire, you need to get rid of suffering, and to get rid of desire, you need to follow the Eightfold Path, and those are called the Four Noble Truths. And then the Eightfold Path, if you really just kind of summarize it, it is just moderation in everything, right? It's just not doing anything too much, right? And then there's just kind of 8 things that they list there to just take it easy on, right? And so Buddhism becomes very popular, mostly throughout East Asia, right? So we're going to see it in China. We're going to see it in China, and we're going to see it in Tibet. We're going to see some of it in Central Asia, Afghanistan, right? So let's kind of try to make some sort of outline here. It'll be quite popular in India, especially when we talk about Ashoka. It gets quite popular in Southeast Asia as well. It'll spread there from India, and it gets quite popular in China, and then from China, it'll make its way into Japan and Korea. So this is kind of the major area we see of Buddhism, right? That's kind of the major area. There might be probably some errors there. So Buddhism gets quite big over in East Asia and Southeast Asia in particular. In India, we do see it get very popular under the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, and we're going to talk a lot about him in a bit. But after Ashoka and after the collapse of the Mauryans, the reason that we don't really see it in India after that is twofold. One we'll talk about in the next time period. But in this time period, it's at the Gupta dynasty, which comes after the Mauryans, about 200 years, I want to say, after maybe 400 years. They use Hinduism as a way to unify the Indian subcontinent under their rule. And so by doing so, they kind of try to push Buddhism out. But that's not necessarily, it's still there, right, at this point. That's not necessarily the reason it really gets driven out. It's going to get driven out by another religion in another era. But that's kind of the area we really see Buddhism spread through. The second religion we're going to talk about is Christianity, which, of course, made its major mark over here in Jerusalem, right? And so Christianity was founded during the time of the Roman Empire. So we're going way forward in time. Buddhism was founded at the very beginning of this era, and then Christianity was founded kind of halfway through the era, right? If this era is 600 BC to 600 CE, right? It's founded, right around 0 or so. And so Christianity is a sect of Judaism at first, right? Jesus himself, Jesus of Nazareth, is a Jew, and he spreads a pretty specific version of what he believed God wants, and is specifically saying that, hey, I'm the Son of God, and this is his lessons that he's teaching through me. And most of those things became, hey, be nice to your neighbor, help the poor, right? A lot of things we see both in Judaism, but then also in Islam. Will kind of it'll have a lot of overlaps with Christianity. You of course have the Ten Commandments coming down from Judaism as well. It gets popular during the Roman Empire. Well, it starts during the Roman Empire and it grows during the Roman Empire. And Rome at this time is in charge of this area. There's both a lot of negatives and a lot of positives for Christianity in terms of Rome. The negative, let's say, is that the Christians are heavily persecuted early on by the Romans, because in Rome, you had to worship the emperor as a god. But both for the Christians and the Jews, they are monotheistic, which means that they can't worship anybody else. And so they were kind of like, hey, we'll pay the taxes we need to, but we're not going to sit here and worship the emperor as a god because we only have one god. And so that led to pretty heavy persecution there. But it's actually mostly economically based, right, in terms of like trying to extract more taxes out of the Jews and the Christians, specifically the Jews early on. But the positive for Christianity is that the Romans built a very, very intricate network of roads. And those roads, as well as their control over the Mediterranean Sea, really allows Christianity to spread throughout the Roman Empire pretty significantly during this time period. And by the end of the time period, we're going to see, that's not what I wanted. We're going to see Christianity throughout lots of these regions right here. Right, throughout most of Europe, we're going to see some variation of Christianity. Maybe let's not go that whole way. I don't think it's that far north yet. It's not going to get that far north until a little bit later. But it makes its presence pretty heavily known in an area we can pretty much look at as the Roman Empire. Now, is it the major religion here? Not necessarily. Not at this point. Not for everybody. And sometimes it also does that. I'm supposed to click on that last thing. Oh, there we go. It actually finished it. That's nice. So we see Christianity spread throughout this area pretty significantly. But it's not really until the next era that's going to take off. And in fact, it's going to take off with the absence of the Romans. Maybe actually at the back end of this era as well, as the Roman Empire falls in 476. Right, we're going to see Christianity become quite popular throughout Europe and parts of North Africa and parts of the Middle East. But then, of course, in the next time period, it's going to then get pushed out of some parts of that by Islam. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay. Two other, not religions, but philosophies I do want to talk about are Confucianism and Taoism, both coming out of China, of course. Right. So Confucianism and Taoism aren't religions. They are philosophies. Confucianism in particular is essentially a political philosophy. It's a way to organize people. Taoism is more of it is spiritual, but it's more of just a kind of way to live life rather than necessarily a worship of a god. Right. Because in China, if you guys recall from the last video, the main worshiping occurs in the relation to worshiping ancestors. Right. And even when Buddhism comes along, that's not really going to change it that much, because Buddhism also does not have that kind of notion of worshiping worshiping a god, right? We will see certain types of Buddhism be concerned with worshiping Buddha like a god, but for now, we're not going to deal with that. So Confucianism is focused on mostly keeping order, right? And it comes at a time, the Warring States period, at a time where order in China doesn't exist, right? And so Confucianism, created by Confucius, is an attempt to make sense of that order and make sense of that disorder and to create order to bring China back together. And we're going to see Confucianism play a heavy role in China until 1911, when the final empire collapses. And even today, you see a lot of Confucian ideals embedded into Chinese culture that we don't necessarily see as Confucian. And on top of that, they're going to spread that Confucianism to lots of parts of East Asia and lots of parts of Southeast Asia. The second one is Taoism, which is not as popular or not as important. Maybe it's still very important, don't get me wrong, but it's not exported to other places as much as we see Confucianism. Taoism is mostly a focus. It's also a way to deal with the disorder of the Warring States period and the chaos. But instead of trying to figure out a solution, it's more of a kind of step back away from it all situation. Right? It's like, you know what? Let's not worry about all this. Why don't you just go interact with nature, be one with nature, and everything will be fine, right? So it's an interesting one. It's an interesting philosophy, and what you tend to see in a lot of, especially in a lot of the Chinese bureaucrats, which we'll talk about here in a bit. What we see a lot occur is that the Chinese people will tend to be Confucian in their public lives, right? Live as Confucian publicly, and then in their private lives, they will act as if a Taoist, right? So they usually see both people practicing both in a way, right? And again, they're not religions, so they're not necessarily exclusionary like that. Whereas you can't be a Christian and a Buddhist. Also, one thing I did want to mention about Christianity and Buddhism also is that they have a bunch of similarities, but maybe one of the most important for our particular purposes of this era is that they are proselytizing religions. They are religions that like to spread to other people. They like to tell other people about Buddhism, right? And we can see that here in Christianity. We can see it in these maps, right? They spread quite a large ways, and that shows that a lot of people wanted to be Buddhist or Christian. And a lot of people were helping spread it. And we're especially going to see that spreading occur on places like the Silk Roads, the Mediterranean Sea, and the Indian Ocean, right? Especially for Buddhism with the Indian Ocean. The Silk Road, very much both of them. We'll actually see some sects of Christianity make its way out into Central Asia here. And then the Mediterranean for Christianity. And then also, I guess I should just mention, we do have 3 major trade routes during this era. I'm not going to mark them on here, but we do have the Silk Road, which is China, all the way into Constantinople, Istanbul today. It does have some legs down it gets into the Middle East. It gets into Iran. It doesn't really get into India too much, but India doesn't mind because it has the Indian Ocean. And then it gets all the way to Istanbul, and then from Istanbul, actually I think it's technically Antioch that it gets to. And then from there, it goes into the Mediterranean. Okay. All right. So those are trade routes. Those are our religions. Let's talk about our civilizations very briefly. We did mention in India, we did mention the Gupta and the Maurya. The Maurya are first. The Gupta are second. The Mauryans are important because they're the first to unify India. And they don't unify all of India. They unify northern India for the most part. We only really see them above the Deccan Plateau, which is right here. Okay. So the founders, Chandragupta Maurya, not to be confused with the founder of Gupta, which is Chandragupta. And so, they're the first to really unify northern India. I think the really important thing, though, to talk about with them for our purposes is Ashoka. He was incredibly important because for a few reasons. Number one, he really helped. One of the key things he did was that he promulgated the law code of India. One of the things that you see a lot in ancient times and classical times is people don't know what their laws are, and that creates a inequality in that society, because what you then tend to see is that if people don't know the laws, what's going to happen is that the whoever, whatever judge is deciding how the laws are to be applied and how people are to be punished based on those laws, they will tend to favor those who have more power in that society because it will probably grant them favors. So what you tend to see is a lot of inequality in the whatever judicial system existed, right? We see this in Rome with the 12 tables. That we'll talk about in a bit, and we see that in India as well. And so Ashoka, to correct that problem, he promulgates his laws. He writes all the laws on these pillars throughout his empire, called the Stone and Pillar Edicts, or the Rock and Pillar Edicts. So that's really important. They talked about him creating an efficient tax system. I can't tell you too much about that. He made tax collection more consistent, which is important. But what I can tell you about is that he also built a major road network throughout northern India to help promote trade throughout the region, helped increase the economy. He also, one of the other key things he did is that he converted to Buddhism. He was in a battle. He was in a major battle to conquer, I believe, Kalinga. And it was very bloody, and he didn't like it. And he kind of looked upon the battle and said, "Why are we doing this? This is terrible. There's no reason for this." And he found an answer to why they were doing that in Buddhism. He converts to Buddhism. He promotes Buddhism throughout his empire. And that leads to growth of Buddhism as popularity, which means that he's kind of majorly responsible for it becoming a major religion. because without him, you're not going to see it make its way into South and Southeast Asia either, or excuse me, Southeast Asia, because he is the one who sponsors lots of missionary work in Southeast Asia. The second empire is the Gupta. They are considered what's called the Golden Age, and we're gonna see this word coming up a lot, especially in this section about different golden ages. What a golden age is that it usually has economic growth involved, right? Usually, it's one of the more powerful economic eras of that society. But then the second part of it can be either technological developments, as we see in China. It can be artistic developments. It can be cultural developments. It can be a lot of those things. And for the Gupta, for India, it's really a lot about science and math. The key thing to come out of this era, out of the Gupta dynasty in terms of math, is the development of the number system, 1 through 9. We tend to call them Arabic numerals because the Arabs were able to get it from India, and then from the Arabs it went to Europe. We got the idea of calling it the Arabic numerals from the Europeans, and so now we call it Arabic numerals today, even though they're originally from India, right? So that's a huge deal, obviously. They also, really did a lot of developments in medicine, especially inoculations, which is essentially what a vaccine is, right? You give somebody a little bit of a particular disease or virus, and then they get a little sick maybe, but that prevents them from getting the big sick. Right? So those are their big developments. They also had public hospitals, right? And in what we see in India throughout, and it's not really going to change ever, is a highly patriarchal society where men are in control of pretty much everything in society. The other thing we're going to see is the caste system continues. Nothing changes there. In China, we start this era off with the Zhou dynasty, Zhou. They've actually been around for a while at this point. They started around 1200 b.c.e. They're going to end around 200, 400, depending on what you think about the Warring States. Warring States period ends of the Zhou dynasty, where they just kind of fall in due to their own corruption. But the key thing that the Zhou bring us is the concept of the mandate of heaven. And the mandate of heaven says that it's basically a religious justification for rule. We're going to see a lot of these pop up throughout history, right? Religious justifications for rule. But the Zhou use the mandate of heaven to justify their takeover. But also it's kind of a double-edged sword, because what can happen then is that if a peasant revolt occurs or a massive famine occurs or anything like that, what it could signal is that the ancestors, right, no longer favor the heavens, no longer favor this dynasty, and they should be overthrown, right? So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, and what you're going to see a lot of times is whenever a new dynasty comes in, they justify it with the mandate of heaven. Okay. We talked about Confucianism. So we have the Zhou dynasty, and then we have the Warring States period, which is exactly as it sounds. And then we have a very important but very short-lived dynasty, the Qin dynasty, Qin, led by Qin Shi Huangdi, rules for 17 years, and then his son takes over. And then Qin Shi Huangdi is so evil to his people that they immediately revolt once his son takes over. Now, the Qin dynasty might have been very brutal. They used a system we're not talking about in this class, but it's called legalism, which is all about like strictly following the law with harsh punishments if you don't. And so Qin Shi Huangdi reunifies China post-Zhou, and it's the first time we really see China fully unified, or at least mostly unified. We're not talking about the whole area, right? But we're talking about a good chunk, right? We're probably talking about this area here, so under the Qin dynasty, give or take. Obviously, it's not a circle. Mongolia is not in it, but you get the point. Southern China is going to take a little longer to get put into the empires here. But the Qin dynasty reunifies the kind of major two river valleys, the Huanghe and the Yangtze river valleys of China. And then they really lay some good groundwork for the next dynasty, mainly with, let's see here, what do I want to talk about? The standardization of weights and measures, the building of roads and canals, and then the standardization of script in China. So basically what they did is they took all these different Chinese microcultures, right, all these different cultures that had some differences in between them that made things like trade and communication a little bit harder. And they said, no, we're not doing it all that. We're all doing this together to make us better. Whether that's good or not, it's up for you to decide. But after the Qin dynasty, pretty quickly we see the Han dynasty rise to power. And the Han dynasty is a golden age of China, mostly for their technological developments and their economic growth. We'll talk about those technological developments here in a bit. But the Qin dynasty, or excuse me, the Han dynasty brings something we have to know about going forward in this class, especially when we get past 1200, and that is the combination of the civil service exam, the bureaucracy, and the Confucian education system. So they all fit together, right? So all students under the Han dynasty are taught, or all people who want to be in the bureaucracy are taught the kind of Confucian ideals and can read the Analects from Confucius and all that stuff. And then they take an exam system, and that kind of determines what kind of bureaucrat they're going to be. Are they going to be a bureaucrat, at the national level? Are they going to be a bureaucrat at the regional level, local level? Are they going to be even a bureaucrat at all? Right, depends on how well they do on the test. Then they fill out the bureaucracy, and a bureaucracy is the group of people who help run a government that aren't necessarily elected or appointed, right, in certain cases. Well, I guess they are appointed, but I mean more like a king or an emperor, right? They help run the government because the king, the emperor, whoever can't run it all themselves, right? And so those three things really work together very well for China for the most part, and they help spread. They help spread China, the territory of China. They help make it a successful economy. They help it make a successful society, and all types of stuff. The technologies that they're very known for are magnetic compasses, which are a big deal. Paper, which is a pretty big deal, I would say. Although, hey, we're living in this electronic age, maybe not so much anymore. And then the stern post rudder, which is the thing at the back of a ship that allows you to navigate, right? So yeah, they did a lot of different stuff, a lot of good things, but we'll talk more about them. We're talking more about China here in a little bit. All right, so we have let's kind of put a circle over here. Let's right there, maybe. Yeah, northern India. All right, so we got two major areas. We got northern India, and we have China. Now let's make our way over here, and let's start over here in the Iran-Iraq region. I'm going to go like right about there. I think that's probably pretty good. Over here we have Persia. So the Persian empires are personally one of my favorites to talk about, but we're not going to talk too much about them in this class. They developed right at the beginning of this era. In fact, you can make the argument that this time period, 600 BCE to 600 CE, begins with the rise of the Persian Empire. Really, they're called the Achaemenid Empire, but there are a line of 4 Persian empires, starting with the Achaemenids. You have the Achaemenids, you have the Seleucids, you have the Parthians, you have the Sassanids. But we kind of lumped them all to call them the Persian empires. They last for a very long time. They last until about I want to say like 1,000, 1,200 CE. I can't be right. I can't be totally sure I'm right on that though, off the top of my head. Persia is really important though because for two key reasons. First off, they build a major road network, and I'm really selling the Achaemenid Empire short. They actually extend their rule all the way into Greece. If you've ever seen the movie 300 or heard about things like the Battle of Thermopylae and stuff like that, that is the Greeks against the Persians. But this is kind of their main area, so we're just going to put it there. They built a major road network throughout their empire, the first to do so before the Romans did it. The other key thing is that they really, really were well known for their bureaucracy and their government administration. What they did with their empire is they developed a thing called the satrap system, where satraps are essentially what we would call our states today, right? They basically divided their huge empire up into these different districts and divisions and had satraps running them to make them much more efficient. And there's a lot more we could go on with there, but I'm not going to because we just don't really have time. Persia's fascinating, though. If you want to learn more, you should definitely check it out. All right, next up, Greece. We got Greece right here. Greece is unique amongst these states we're talking about in that they're not really a state. They're like they're a collection of cities, polis, the city-states. They do have a shared culture. They have a shared religion. They have a shared language. So they share a lot together. They were conquered, or at least the Greeks on the Ionian coast right here were conquered by the Persians, and that led to their war with Persia between Athens, Sparta, the Delian League, which is the alliance of the Greek city-states, and the Persians. The Greeks actually win this, or at least don't lose, let's say. Who won is, hard to decide. But they basically get their independence. And then, but as soon as that happens, they kind of go to battle against each other, Athens and Sparta in particular. Sparta wins just in time for a guy out of this country, Macedon, right here, or Macedonia today, but Macedon back then, by the name of Alexander, to invade and take over Greece, and then go through and take over all of Anatolia, all of the Middle East, Egypt, all of the Persian Empire. So he destroys the Achaemenid Empire and gets all the way to the Indus River before he sadly dies on the way back. Or not sadly. I don't know. It's up to you to decide. But the key thing about Alexander's conquerings is that he spreads Greek culture throughout this entire region right here. Right? And this is called the Hellenistic world. And in fact, we even have evidence of it all the way in Afghanistan, and a really cool blend of cultures where we see Buddhist statues of Buddha in Greek styles in Afghanistan, what was called Bactria. All right, so that's fascinating. Hellenistic culture is not necessarily the Greek language, although we do see lots of Greek colonists make their way through this whole region. And in fact, the Seleucid Empire that I talked about that took over after the Achaemenids was actually a Greek leadership. The Ptolemaic dynasty will take over Egypt, will also be Greek. But so we see the spread of Greek culture, Greek art, Greek painting, Greek philosophy, right? Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates, those kind of guys making their way through this whole region, as well as places like Italy and Northern Africa as well. Okay. Our final state over here, and I believe in all of Eurasia. Nope, I don't want to do it like that. Can I undo that? Can I cancel that one? I'm just going to delete it. There we go. Save. All right. Is the Roman Empire. It's the Roman Republic / Roman Empire, and I'm going to try to get this. That's okay. And then, so this is mostly the Roman Empire. They also take over this chunk right here, as we talked about with Christianity. The Roman Republic started out early on. I have a lot to say about Rome. I'm going to try to keep it short. I've actually been reading a Roman book, a book about Rome lately. But they started out as a republic. Which reminds me, I should also mention Athens, the city in Greece, was a democracy a little bit before Rome became a republic. But Rome was kind of a backwater at that point. They weren't very powerful. Over time, the Romans grow in power due to their defeat of the city of Carthage, which is right here where Tunis is today. So they started as a republic, and they have the 12 tables, which is a law code promulgated, again, just like with Ashoka's stone and pillar edicts, to make sure that there was fair representation in court. And so they start out just as the city of Rome, and then they grow throughout the Italian peninsula, and then they defeat Carthage in what are called the Punic Wars. And then they're eventually able to take over all the Eastern Mediterranean, and then they turn and face Greece. And Greece at this point is post-Alexander, and so they are not nearly as powerful as they once were, and they're able to kind of easily roll over the Greeks and take them over. Again, they go all the way to the Middle East. They eventually kind of share a border at the Euphrates River right here with the Parthian kingdom, the Persian Parthians. And they will take over that whole area and form an empire. And we talked about Christianity already. Okay, what else do we need to talk about here? We'll talk about that here in a second. So let's talk about, so we talked about how they're all involved in trade networks. And as you can kind of see here, if we kind of plot the Silk Road out, right? And this is not, again, this is not necessarily the exact route. Please don't say this is the exact route, because it's not. But we see the Silk Road right through these major states. And the reason we see it through these major states is because those are one of the key components of having the Silk Roads, is that these major states provide a protection of this trade route within their borders, which made merchants feel safer to travel through these regions, which was what makes the Silk Road tick, right? Same thing with Mediterranean trade network, which really, in fact, is at some point just going to be a Roman trade network, right? Before that, though, even before the Romans took over, it was a bustling trade network. It was massively important at the time. Again, we got Carthage right here, which was a massive trade city. The Greeks were very into trading. The Romans also were as well, and the pre-Roman Italians, right? Okay, so then we also had the Indian Ocean, which was really supported a lot by the Persian Empire and the Gupta and Mauryan empires, although not necessarily it would be much more supported in future eras. Okay, let's talk about some reasons for decline. When we talk about declines ever, and we're not going to talk too. I mean, we will talk about declines once we get to 1200. But you can really categorize it into two broad categories of reasons. One is internal problems, whether it's political corruption, whether it's famine, whether it is lack of tax revenues or peasant revolts for one reason or the other. And then you have external ones like invasion, and then maybe somebody brought you the plague. And we have both of those going on for most of these states. Both in China and Rome, they both got hit by a plague pretty hard at this time period. And really, when we're talking about the collapse, we're mostly talking about the collapse of Rome and Han China, because it happens kind of around the same era. But we see a plague go across the Silk Road, hit everybody here. We don't really know how hard the Parthians got hit, simply because we don't have a lot of written documentation there. But that leads to a collapse for both of them. On top of that, both of them have external challenges from militaries, from different armies. The Xiongnu, Xiongu, will invade the Han. And over in the Roman Empire, the Huns will invade the Germans, the Germanic peoples, which are right on the border of the empire. Those Germanic peoples will then flood into the empire itself and take over Rome. Well, not take it over. Let's just say destroyed it. The eastern part, this eastern portion right here, let's try to make a circle within a circle within a circle. Nope, that's a terrible circle. Oh, I can move it? That's cool. Can I cancel that last one? Can I delete? There we go. This part right here-ish will remain together as the Byzantines. We'll talk a little bit about the Byzantines. The Byzantines called themselves the Romans. They were the Romans. We call them the Byzantines because historians call them the Byzantines to differentiate them from the Romans. But really, it's just the Romans, but non-Rome. Right? So they collapse. Some other issues that they talked about are social conflicts, increasing wealth gaps between the rich and the poor. And we're going to come to that as a topic in many collapses of many different states when you have just massive inequality. That leads to a lot of the peasants just kind of getting fed up with it and rebelling, right? But yeah, those are kind of, so those are the main ones. We have internal, we have external. Internal is trade issues, maybe plague for China, since that's where the plague originated at that point. But you have trade issues, you have social inequality issues, and then you have external issues such as invasions. So yeah, all right. And then lastly, very briefly, we have the Maya over here, and then we also have the Teotihuacan, the city of Teotihuacan, which is located in modern-day Mexico, near Mexico City. Teotihuacan, not a whole lot to talk about. They had a gridded street system. They're going to really influence the Aztecs later on, but that's for another time. And then the Mayans are very important. They are in the kind of Central American region, up to the Yucatan. The Mayans are also a city-state structure like the Greeks. They get very, very powerful. They develop a very complex written language. They also start to use math for astronomy. They create the concept of zero on their own, which most people in Europe and Eurasia haven't done at that point, Afro-Eurasia. But yeah, not too much on the Americas at this point, just because we don't know. We don't have a whole lot of records on them, right? So that's classical era in maybe 30 minutes or so. Hopefully that is helpful. Hopefully this is useful. I really miss the classical era. I used to have to teach it every year. I really, really liked it. It's my favorite era. But alas, we're going to move on to the post-classical era. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next one.